Great, thank you. And so a round of applause for yourselves. You've been amazing. You're all still here. Wow, incredible. I must confess, if this was a conference where I wasn't speaking, I would probably be in the bar by now. But that whiskey has got my name on it, so I'll be quick. So I'm just responding. There's clearly a much longer and a bigger study here because there's some data and information that is not in the paper that's in the pack. So I'm just responding to the paper. And I'll also not deal with the policy recommendations. So I'll just engage with some of the conceptual starting points and contributions of the work. So firstly, incredibly welcoming work, and it's fantastic that we're beginning to build the empirical base around the idea that informality is key and it's central. And I guess my first major point is to sort of take this idea of the hybrid economy, where we don't see it in dichotomous terms, but as a spectrum, and that there's interdependencies, and maybe stretch that hybridity even further. I think there's a set of literatures now on the role of social enterprises and what we used to speak of as co-ops, cooperative economic structures, or in contemporary parlance, the solidarity economy, and how these can help us to think about different capacities for collective economic action, and maybe with a social purpose, and how that in turn is increasingly now seen as an institutional form that is critical for this new debate on the circular economy. And of course, the interesting point for us is that Africa is in a way prefigurative of the circular economy because reuse and recycling is so fundamental to the optimization of productivity of all kinds of waste and commodities and so on. So I think that there's something conceptually really interesting to see if we can stretch the idea of the hybrid economy even further than what is reflected in the paper. The second point is that I think what is a fantastic advance in this work is the insistence that we begin to spatialize the value chains of formal work. And sort of in the work that I've seen and so on, it's hard to fully comprehend how that is being approached, but I'm absolutely convinced that it's the right set of questions and the right conceptual avenue to take. This then leads me to another sort of theme that is underdeveloped, and I think it's where Tony ended off. And this is the claim in the paper that the informal economy can be transformative. And this is a very enticing proposition right at the front, and you kind of come to the end, and it's not really clarified itself about what the mechanism for that transformation is beyond recognition and hopefully enhancing the productivity once recognition and appropriate regulation is introduced. And then a similar kind of sort of lack of specificity, for me at least, came through in this equally important concept of the missing middle. So they didn't have a lot of time to develop that, and it's a really central plank of the policy agenda of the paper, and I think it's, again, a spot on. But there's a notion that it's firms that employ people, more than 30 people. And I kind of found the number a little bit arbitrary, if I might say. I couldn't work out why 30 and not 20, so it seemed to me, just unclear from the paper. But as I say, I think this is a summary paper, and then I'm sure that there's a fuller elaboration. And then, of course, that threshold will also be different for the different sectors, as the presenters have intimated, that you talk about very different dynamics depending on the sectoral focus. The last aspect that I really want to support, but also encourage the authors to push this further, is, and it connects back to the idea that we need to spatialize value chains, is a recognition that design thinking and participatory design research is probably one of the most useful tools to begin to work with the informal entrepreneurs themselves, but also to create the language and the policy frames to help weave this back to policy reform and regulation. And let me explain very briefly. So in the paper, they introduce a particular design notion of streets and how to rethink the functioning of streets and so on, and I think that's a useful entry point. But I think that there's a set of prior questions which is less about the specificities of the spatial form and its uses, and more about what a participatory design research methodology can generate in terms of both augmenting what people are already doing, but also optimizing spatial functionalities. And this then for me is at the heart of this theme that the paper raises about soft regulation. Again, crucial recommendation, absolutely correct policy terrain, but you know, it still needs a lot of substantiation. And at the moment, it seems to me that the thinking around soft regulation is still very state-centric. And I want to suggest that if we think through the possibilities of participatory design methodologies, we can come up with a regularized mechanism for dialogue and engagement that can in fact give us the clues about what that soft regulation should entail, and can in turn imply the buy-in of the participants because they would have generated themselves. And of course, there's a whole set of back-end things there about how one would get the state to think in non-traditional and rent-seeking ways about regulation, which I can't get into now. So I then just want to then end off with the reflection around what the paper calls for, which is the institutionalization of informal governance. I think this is right, and I think there's an interesting connect between the two papers of this afternoon, where we were told that, of course, the political economy and the power relations in governance is not a simple matter, and in fact, it is underpinned at a systemic level, often by corruption and rent-seeking behavior. And so how exactly one thinks through the empowerment of associations that represent informal traders so that it can begin to dislodge the patterns of patronage and rent-seeking would be really fantastic to learn more about. So I want to congratulate the authors and the papers for taking us further in terms of a really vital piece of the puzzle, and I look forward to where this work is going to go. Thank you.